Then I took a smidge and applied it down there.
This one's wife. She ignored you because you're in a wheelchair. Hello, I'm HG Tudor. This video enables you to understand more about the misfiring cognitive empathy of this one's wife, which simply is there to try and mask the fact that she has no emotional empathy, doesn't care about anybody other than herself, and is simply an unpleasant individual. You have many instances of her behaviour, some rumoured, some spoken about, some actually witnessed in video footage, of how she conducts herself in an unpleasant and bullying fashion. Here, there is a recollection which is shared by a subredditor called Content Pineapple 3330, who has written about somebody's experience who had met this one's wife. It's shared on the subreddit Saint This One's Wife. They use her full name, as you know, I do not. And it's an excellent short piece which provides you with further insight into the way that the narcissist that is this one's wife behaves when dealing with members of the public. Remember, when this one's wife is dealing with another human being, what is it that drives her? You ought to know by now. It's the pursuit of the prime aims. Every interaction that she has with another human being, and every potential interaction with another human being, this is what is behind it. It's not greed, it's not envy, although those might be utilised by her narcissism. It's not kindness or hatred, although that might be utilised again by her narcissism. What drives what she says and what she does is the necessity of gaining and keeping control, nullifying threats to control, drawing fuel, gaining character traits and residual benefits. That is what is behind her behaviour. In a sense, it's quite simple. If you ask yourself, why did she do that? The answer is, it was related to the pursuit of the prime aims. 1, 2, 3, or 4 of those aspects. That's what it is. Always. And this is demonstrated here. When she interacts with people, she has to control them. She has to get them under control, she has to keep them under control, or nullify potential threats to control. In some instances, she will also draw fuel from them. She manages a facade whereby she wants to be seen as this kind and decent person, this empathic, loving, popular woman who's a great mum and has an idyllic marriage. That she wants to maintain this facade of being uber talented. That's what she wants to portray to the outside world. But as we know, there are repeated occasions where that facade comes under pressure and fractures appear in it. In this instance, the recollection is as follows. The charity, third sector, is packed to the brim in the United Kingdom, especially the cancer sector, and a royal patron can make all the difference. I'm lucky enough to work for one who had the late Queen as patron, recalls this individual. So what's this got to do with Madam? Before 2020, planning had already started for the succession of patronages once the Queen passed on. And it was suggested that Madam may want to take us on. A charity with children and families at its centre is a good look. Indeed it is. Being a patron of that particular charity would appeal to a mid-range narcissist because it would make her look good. It would maintain that pretense, that facade, although she doesn't know that it's a pretense or a facade, of being kind. It would enable her to access people that she could control with this patronage. That it would enable her to draw fuel from people by way of their responses of, oh, isn't she kind, isn't she caring? The writer continues, so she came for a visit. These royal visits are really important, as big donors want meet and greets. We get a year's worth of press and publicity, and the staff and the families we support have a great day. We get donations for catering and funfair equipment, and it's a party. She was a fucking brat. She sulked, response to threat to control, when we told her team she couldn't have a photo opportunity hugging the children. Thus, she wants a photo opportunity for the purposes of management of facade and then to use that to assert control over a viewership and a readership. She's told no. Her response to that is to assert control by withdrawal by being sulky, present silent treatment. She didn't want to sit down to talk to the mums about their experiences. Again, assertion of control by withdrawal because she hadn't got her own way. My colleague wheeled me in. I'm in a wheelchair. And I was placed in the line for the meet and greet when I was introduced to her. I have a gender-neutral first name, and our CEO explained my big patent. She reached over me to shake his hand, flirting with someone who's almost half her age, and completely ignored me. This is demonstrative of the way that this one's wife behaves, that she isn't interested in a person who is in a wheelchair simply because her narcissism despises somebody of that nature. She only wants to be associated with successful people. She would only pose with somebody in a wheelchair for the purposes of facade management. Otherwise, that individual is of no interest to her. Weakness, illness, being disabled, having some kind of drawback, some kind of impairment, offends her own notion of superiority. It's almost as if she fears that she would be tainted by it, that she would somehow catch the impediment. And thus her narcissism, as a starting point, seeks to steer her away from that because it deems association with such an individual as problematic. Accordingly, her narcissism asserts control in that moment over the CEO by being flirtatious with him, which of itself was inappropriate, lack of boundary recognition, and also asserts control over the lady who's in the wheelchair as a consequence of the fact that she ignores her. Thus, that is jettisoning her, which is the third assertion of control. Nevertheless, the CEO explained that she was the genius, his words, to which this brings the individual in the wheelchair onto the radar again of this one's wife. Her response was this, "Oh," and walked off. Didn't exhibit any interest. Didn't talk to the person about what their work was, that how they'd been called the genius, what that all involved. She just simply walked away. Why? Because her narcissism deemed that there was nothing to be gained in talking to this individual. Fuel wasn't required from them, nor character traits or residual benefits. And in the circumstances, it was more appropriate to assert control by being rude and walking off. She simply did not want to have the interaction with somebody in a wheelchair. The article continues by explaining, our CEO was gobsmacked at her rudeness and the palace was so apologetic. Anyway, we got someone else. They're brilliant, and this person has an amazing sense of humour. So it turned out well for the charity in the end, despite that rudeness towards the individual in the wheelchair. This demonstrates the unpleasantness of this one's wife. And if I recall correctly, she also ignored somebody who was in a wheelchair at the Invictus Games, where the individual was wanting to get her attention, and she was holding on to her, and she was looking in the other direction and basically tried to pull herself away from this person. This is because this one's wife doesn't have any emotional empathy for the person in the wheelchair. She doesn't have any common decency. She doesn't care. The only reason she'll interact with you is if it serves her purposes. And somebody in a wheelchair is basically seen as a problem. They're seen as not glamorous in her world. They're seen as having an impairment which doesn't fit with how she believes that she is seen. There might be instances for the purposes of facade where she'd have a picture taken with them, but that facade has to work hard in circumstances where she's interacting with somebody in a wheelchair, and we see where it fractures when she behaves in the rude way, where at the Invictus Games she ignored that person, and in this anecdote here, where she similarly ignored the individual and then just walked away from them when her attention was brought back to them. This, once again, demonstrates how her narcissism causes her to behave in such an unpleasant manner. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.